So, welcome everyone. I am thrilled to be co-hosting this very amazing event, Hookers in the House of the Lord, and I am beyond thrilled that you are here to attend, both here in person and the people who are attending online with live streaming. I already told you if you don't want to be on live stream, then try to be not in this area anywhere on the side and behind the camera will not be streaming you. So you're seeing me here with a microphone. This microphone is feeding the live stream. You who are in this room do not have any benefit of this live. You just have my human voice and all the other speakers too. We will try our best to speak up. So my name is Pastor B. Chan, and by now you will also have figured out that I speak with an accent, and some of you may wonder, what is her accent? So yes, I speak with a German accent. And if you have peeked in your program, you might have also noticed that my last name is Chan. So the second question that I usually get after people say, what's your accent is, but why are you called Chan? So doesn't that sound Chinese? It is, in fact, a Chinese last name. For many years, I was married to a man from Hong Kong, and so I still like my Chinese last name. About 13 or 14 years ago, I kind of figured out where I belong in the world. So I am now married to a woman from Russia. Some people will never ever set foot in a church, and for good reason. The church has a terrible track record of oppression, violence, and even murder. So if people are unable to come in a church space, I really understand. If anyone here today has ever been hurt by the church, I want to tell you how very, very, very sorry I am that has happened. And if anyone here has a hard time stepping into a church and has come anyhow, thank you. So yes, the church has a terrible record of oppression and violence and abuse and murder. But every once in a while, there is a segment of the church that manages to be true to the teachings of Jesus, that manages to be on the side of liberation and freedom and justice and healing. The Holy Cross Church in London, England represents such a segment of the church, and we will hear about that church a lot more in just a moment. And then also this congregation here, St. Francis Lutheran Church. I have the great good fortune to serve as the pastor of an amazing congregation. This congregation has always been on the side of those who are marginalized and ostracized. Over its 110 years of history, it has stood with the poor and the homeless and immigrants. And then during the 80s, in the AIDS crisis, it has come out in support of people with AIDS and their families. And in order to serve them better, they have also decided that the best people to serve queer people are queer people. So they called two lesbian pastors, Rolf and Phyllis, and ordained them. And as a result, they were put on trial, and then put for a while on suspension, and after 5 years, kicked out of the Lutheran Church. Well, as you can see, we are back inside the Lutheran Church after many, many years of advocacy. The Lutheran Church has actually changed its policy And now people like me, an openly practicing lesbian, married to another openly practicing lesbian, can also be an openly practicing ordained pastor. So that took a lot of work. So finally, I want to tell you how much this event means for me, because it respects not only the teachings of Jesus, it respects the person of Jesus. The Gospel of John begins with a very interesting introduction to who Jesus was. It begins with a genealogy. A genealogy is a list of ancestors. And there's a very, very long list, starting with Abraham, and it is the ancestors of Joseph. So that should give you pause right there, because we say that Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary. So why is he being introduced with a list of ancestors based on the lineage of Joseph? But there is more. In this lineage, there's of course a long, 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 long list of men, Abraham and all the other patriarchs after him. But there are 4 women in that list, only 4. And of those 4 women listed, 2 were prostitutes. I'm not making that up. You can open your Bible and look it up for yourself. So the first woman prostitute listed there is Tamar. She worked as a prostitute, as far as we know, just once in her life in order to become pregnant. She wanted to become pregnant so that the lineage of Judah could continue. The other prostitute was Rahab, who protected 2 spies who came to Jericho and kept them safe and helped them to escape from their enemies. And then after the settlement of Jericho, which is kind of a terrible story, but she married one of those 2 spies. And in this way, she also became an ancestor of Jesus. But you didn't come here for Bible lessons, so I just want to again say welcome, and I have just a few more logistics. So there is a book table in the back, so if you haven't had a chance yet, please go there for information and for literature. And I know you've already found a snack table, very good. Bathrooms are throughout those 2 white doors. I already mentioned that we are live streaming this event, which means it will also later on be available as a recording if you want to watch the whole thing again and again and again, or forward it to your friends. That is a possibility. And now, have I forgotten anything? Without further ado, I want to introduce to you Rachel West, and later on we introduce everybody else on the team, but the first person I want to introduce is Rachel West from the U.S. Prostitute Collective, and she's going to say a few words, and her saying a few words gives me a chance to set up our video clips. And anyone here who is in the habit of praying, would you please start praying right now? Because setting up video clips is usually not my thing. And Tia, the wonderful Tia, would have been here. And so let's all say hello to Tia on live stream. Tia is very sick with the flu. Tia, they are the heart and brain of bringing all this event together. So we are sad, Tia, that you're not here with us. And so now I will be the one trying to set up our clips. And Rachel, you can take it from here. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Pastor B. It's been a joy working with you. It's been really wonderful. And today we're talking about the occupation of churches by sex workers. Historically, sex workers have taken sanctuary in churches to protest the brutal impact of criminalization. And interestingly, mothers were at the forefront of those occupations. And we're going to talk a lot about mothers today, and who are invisible in the sex worker movement There were occupations in San Francisco. I'll tell you a bit about that. Occupations in London, England. That's what we're focusing on today, that particular occupation. Occupations in Vancouver, Canada, and also in France. That was the first. Yeah, okay, I'll stand up. France was the first place in 1975 where women took over a church in Lyon, and it spread all over France. So there have been a number of occupations that have taken place, and today we're going to explore the one that happened in London. These actions helped start the sex worker rights movement internationally. And in the UK, women entered the church to protest after the police threatened to take away the child of a woman who was working because she had pleaded not guilty, and they were just furious and wanted to get, they were incensed and wanted to do something about it and show their power. So yeah, it began the new modern day sex worker rights movement, and I wanted to say something on that note to remember Carol Lee. Yes, many of you would know Carol Lee, also known as Scarlet Harlot, who passed away recently. And we're remembering her for the many years she dedicated and contributed to the sex worker rights movement for decriminalization. She and I served on the San Francisco City's Task Force on Prostitution. I'll say a bit more about that. That was set up by the city government in 1994 and lasted 2 years. And Carol and I both were on it, and she will be missed. Rest in power, Carol. She, along with Margot St. James, who I'm sure many of you know, the founder of Coyote in San Francisco, one of the first sex worker organizations, are key figures in the history of the sex worker movement in the Bay Area, and we're remembering them both today. Prominent, as I said, in church occupations were mothers, and most sex workers are mothers working to support children and other family members. As we see today, there's a police crackdown going on in the Mission. We'll talk more about that later. I don't know if you've heard about it, but we have some action planned for that. And instead of addressing the high levels of poverty that exist in San Francisco, the city which is driving more sex workers into prostitution. There's a direct connection between poverty and prostitution, and we're all going to speak about that today because it's not spoken about enough. And the city's response to that is more arrests and more criminalization. Today, as I said, we're highlighting the occupation of the Church of the Holy Cross in London, in UK, in 1982, 40 years ago. And that the women went into the church for 12 days, and they hung a banner outside the church saying, "Mothers need money. End police illegality and racism." A remarkable event, a reunion event, took place in London, and I went to it recently in October, where the church invited the English Collective of Prostitutes who organized the occupation back to the church to reflect on the significance of the occupation. And it was a wonderful event, a packed church, and people had, extraordinary remembrances of that occupation. So next we're going to be showing some film clips of, not yet, of some of the media that they got, because there was, a huge amount of media on the issue of prostitutes going into a church in London, including international media. And sex workers got a chance to put their case, their truth, forward to the public. And the public heard about the reality of sex workers' lives in a way that had never happened before. And it broke ground in many ways. And the second film clip you'll see is interviews on a black radio show in London at that time in 1982 with black sex workers talking about their work and their lives, which that was new, that people would even hear from black sex workers, and the kind of racism they faced. So you'll see those clips in a minute. And so the occupation helped, move the public debate forward and shift public opinion in relation to sex workers. And at that time, you'll see the media love to say the vice girls this and the vice girls that. But then, you know, after the occupation, they shifted that to prostitute women or sex workers, you know, so it really had an impact. And we in San Francisco at that time in 1982, that's just when the US Prostitutes Collective was starting going, we did a support picket outside the British consulate, you know, to press for them to take up their demands. And we had, you know, quite a good effort as a result. And so now we're going to watch the clips from back then in 1982 when the English Collective of Prostitutes and their supporters went into the church.
Not that one? Oh, I'm sorry.
Our tech person. Yeah, there we go.
The women say they're occupying the church to bring attention to what they claim is the increasing level of police harassment of prostitutes in the area. Wearing masks to protect their identities, they went ahead with an early morning breakfast and announced their intention to stay put.
Well, a number of women came into the church after the evening service and explained to the vicar what the situation was and said that we were going to stay until we had seen the people that we were asking to see and until
Turn it up.
the situation can change.
Close to the church is Argyle Square, a favourite haunt of prostitutes. The police say they've not received any official complaint about harassment. But the vicar of Holy Cross, who lives in the square, says the girls have a right to make their protest.
But I think in the midst of all this, that the girls also have a point to make. I think probably they are harassed. And too much concentration, in my mind, is directed to the girls themselves and not to the evils of society which caused them to be here in the first place.
Father Richardson says the women can stay at the church, providing they don't disrupt services. At lunchtime, he nervously put his stand to the test as he waited for parishioners to arrive for Mass.
I'm not in total control of the building.
Does this mean you're saying now that the women, in fact, are controlling the church?
I think we're controlling it jointly, by consent, mutual consent,
How long do you see that situation lasting yourself?
until one of us gets tired of it.
All four of the lunchtime congregation were duly let in by the women, who then firmly locked the door on newsmen. Father Richardson later announced the group had been respectful throughout the service. So it looks tonight as if the English Collective of Prostitutes will continue their sit-in with the tolerance, if not the blessing, of church authorities. Steve Clark in King's Cross for Thames News.
By a group of women demanding rights for prostitutes. The protesters, who donned black masks for fear of being recognised, claim that prostitutes working in the King's Cross area are constantly harassed and victimised by the police. The vicar, Father Trevor Richardson, has so far backed the protest, and so has the Women's Committee of Camden Council. But this sympathy isn't shared by the Holy Cross congregation, who on Sunday had to worship in makeshift surroundings. And as the 5-day protest has continued, further criticism has begun to develop over the fact that not all women sitting in are in fact prostitutes. Some are long-time feminist campaigners and have been accused of doing the prostitutes of King's Cross more harm than good.
Now, Selma James, you are leading this protest, and you're not. Well, you're one of the leaders, and you're very heavily involved. Now, you're not a prostitute. How do you
make
know?
it sound like that's a crime.
I'm just stating the case.
Yeah.
How do you know, since you aren't a prostitute, what the prostitutes of King's Cross really want?
Because they say so all the time. They say so to everybody, and nobody listens, and that's why we took over the church. So now they are hearing, and now people who want to defend the police are attacking those of us who are not prostitutes and those of us who are, for putting the case before the public.
All right, now there have been some fairly upfront attacks on you, particularly today in some of the national newspapers. And it's been pointed out that you're a long-time campaigner for women against rape, for wages for housework, housewives in dialogue, black women for wages and so on.
Black women.
Fine.
Sounds ominous.
Worthy causes as these, I'm sure, may be, isn't there a danger that your reputation as a professional adopter of causes might backfire on the girls you're trying to represent and make the public lose sympathy for the girls?
I don't earn my living as a backer of causes as you earn your living by questioning people who do have causes. I earn my living as a typist. And I would like to say that every woman should be interested in the cause of prostitutes in King's Cross And every person who understands that the police are not doing what they're supposed to be doing and are doing what they're not supposed to be doing, are doing illegal things, should be very interested, very concerned with what we are doing. We're the front line, demanding that the police activity in King's Cross and elsewhere be looked into.
Some of the girls were quoted today as saying that your sitting at the church had caused the police to crack down even harder. How do you reply to that?
I think that that's partly true. I think that many girls are not being arrested, and I think that some girls are being arrested more, especially those, whom the police can get at. They're very angry when women stand up for their rights, and they're doing more illegal work in some areas now than they were before.
Well,
are you sorry?
Is sitting a good thing? If the
yes.
Police, it's causing the police to crack down harder.
No, the police are doing some more illegal work in some areas and some less illegal work in others. Women walked out of the church today and were threatened with arrest, but they were not arrested because we were with them. Those of us who have been publicly identified. There is no way it is a bad thing to point to police illegality if you have a case, and we have one. You cannot say that that's unjust.
Sandra, there's one final point I'd like to put to you. The idea of campaigning for prostitutes' rights is not a new one.
Right.
In this country, a body called the Josephine Butler Society was founded in 1870 to protect prostitutes' civil rights, and today they told us that they could not support your sit-in.
Yeah.
Why do you think it is that the oldest body in the country to help prostitutes is not supporting you?
Because they're not interested in prostitutes. They're careerists who are making their living by saying they're interested and concerned and looking around and doing nothing. Women have come to them for help and they've refused.
So, thank you very much. I'm sorry to cut you off, we're running out of time.
I recommend some content to watch. To do a voice search, don't talk about button while speaking.
Tech person will say.
Yeah.
Which one are we doing?
We want to do next, we want this one, yeah.
Dramatic rise in the number of black women on the streets.
Okay.
What may surprise or even offend some people is that these women regard themselves as no different from the thousands of other young black women, many of them single mothers, in our cities. In fact, they say that their demands are actually the basis of a campaign on behalf of all these women. Simi Bedford went to talk to some of the girls on the game.
Just one day last November, just packed my bags and came down on the train. And then I went to one of the hotels on King's Cross and I booked in. Then I went and sat in the Wimpy bar about 11 o'clock at night time. Just sat there, didn't know anybody or anything like that. And this English girl came up to say that this man wanted a black girl, and I was the only black girl there at the time. So I went with him, and I went back to the hotel to do business.
Chantal is a single mother. She has 3 children. She's 21 years old, and she's been a prostitute for exactly a year. Samantha is just 20. She has a daughter of 6. She's been on the game for nearly 2 years.
Well, I named some friends who they had friends on the game and stuff, and I thought about it for a very long time, It's a very hard decision to make. And one day I just said to myself, yeah, I might as well. Nothing else left to do, and that sounds a lot better than this, so I thought I'd try it.
Chantal and Samantha are just 2 of the growing number of young black women who have taken to the streets to earn their living. In fact, it's said that nearly half the prostitutes that work in this area, King's Cross, are now black. And not only are their numbers growing, but these young women are very different from the traditional image of the prostitute. Many of them are well educated, most of them have children, and almost all would say that they got onto the game through their own deliberate and conscious choice, rather than being forced into prostitution through circumstances. And it's this new attitude towards their work that seems to be leading them to take the kind of political action that could have consequences, not just for prostitutes, but for young black women in general. For many of the new black prostitutes, the story begins with a family conflict, often over moral issues.
My mother was very strict, and things like that. She wouldn't, let us go anywhere. The only place we used to go was school and back home. We never used to get to see the outside. And I think in most black families, when things like that happen, then the first chance the kids get, they break away. Most black people, the parents, they always have this constant reminder that when they was your age and they didn't do this and they do that, most of the kids got taught to them anyway, because remember that. I never talked to my mother to this day, not about anything or nothing.
Chantal became pregnant at the age of 16. Like many other black parents in a similar situation, her parents were scandalized. Chantal's mother actually called her a prostitute, and she feels that since she was already seen as immoral, it was less difficult to throw off any moral scruples about going on the game.
Yeah, my parents felt that I let them down, because when I had my daughter, they looked at it like it was the end of the world. It was the biggest crime that anybody could have committed in the first place. So they felt that I let them down. To them, I was a prostitute then. So being a prostitute now wouldn't make any difference to them. Not to my mother anyway.
Wilmette Brown has worked with women like Chantal for more than 6 years. She believes that this kind of conflict, though it doesn't lead directly to prostitution, often forces women to leave home.
Hi. Yeah, how was the meeting? Black families have put a lot of emphasis on respectability. We've had to. It's been a way that we've tried to survive. And what has begun to happen is that there's a new generation, obviously, of black young women in this country who have all the expectations of their generation, white and black, and for whom respectability is no longer paramount in the way that it was for their parents. And a conflict develops, so that when a young woman, for one reason or another, has to leave home, she then has to deal with how she's going to survive. And she's likely to say, well, whatever worked for my parents is not good enough for me or doesn't work for me, and I'm going to survive how I can.
And it's the fact that there are so few options available for economic survival that can lead women to choose prostitution. Traditionally, employment for young black women has been restricted to low-paid public sector jobs. Today, there are fewer and fewer of these jobs available. For Chantal, at least, finding a job was a major problem.
No, when I had the job as a machinist, I lost that because the factory closed down. And I had various jobs in between that. Because after I had my machinist job, I went to work in the biscuit factory. And that was like really slavery, so I gave that up. Then I went to do typing, but that was only temporary. Then I went into catering at school. That was also temporary. And then after that, I couldn't find another job.
But for many black girls of Chantal and Samantha's generation, the kind of work that their mothers took was no longer acceptable. They wanted more out of life.
First job I worked car telephonist and I didn't get enough money for that. I thought, you know, I worked all week. And all I got was about 40 quid. I just couldn't do me, you know.
Did you find that your other friends, I mean other black girls like yourself, I mean what kind of jobs did they have?
I mean, they either worked in factories or shops and things like that, you know. And I just couldn't work any of them. They just didn't pay enough money. I worked too hard for a little bit of money. So I said I had to do something else.
When they couldn't find satisfactory work, these women turned to social security. But they found this way of life equally difficult to accept. What they really hated was the idea of depending on the state. Women like Chantal and Samantha wanted their own homes and incomes to provide better lives for both themselves and their children. Besides, they live constantly with the fear that if they aren't seen to be secure and independent, their children might be taken away and put into care. It's both the dislike of what they see as state charity and the desire for independence that takes many black women into prostitution.
When you go down to see them, all they do is sympathize with you. I mean, you don't need that. You go to them, you're asking them for help, but they feel that you have to beg for it, sort of thing. And which, instead of I go and beg them, now when I think about it, I prefer to be out on the street and go and beg them. Because when I beg them, they feel like, well, they give it me when they want, and when they feel like it, or when they think that I'm in need of it. I just wanted to be independent, you know. I wanted to have mine, I wanted to have things I like to have, and I knew that if I went on the game and I made that money, I'd be able to get those things. At least I'd get a lot more money than what I would on social security or working and having a job.
These attitudes are creating a new style of prostitute, more self-confident and more self-reliant. Some of the women I spoke to were saving up for businesses that they intended to set up in a few years' time. And unlike previous generations of prostitutes, almost none of them were organised by pimps. "Why should I hand over my hard-earned cash to a man?" was a comment repeated by several. It's precisely because of their very different response to the problems of their work that this new generation of black prostitutes is beginning to make the public aware of just how different they are.
Women we talked to said that conditions were tougher if you were a black prostitute. White girls often sign up with escort agencies to avoid working on the streets, but black prostitutes claim that they are often shut out of the agencies.
When the agencies, you know, it's mostly English girls there, and if there's any black girls, you don't get a job. You can hang around for months and you don't get a job. If you go to sort of places like escort agencies, they tend to say, "Oh well, it's not the season for the black girls yet, you know." It's the Arab season, like the Germans like the black girls and things like that, you know. It's a bit difficult for you then.
And on the streets, they claim that the police single them out for more attention than the white prostitutes.
So like where I work now, I'm the only black girls that work on that area. And there's quite a few English girls that work in the same place as I do. And the majority of the time, when the police come out, they always come straight to me and tell the rest of the girls to go home, and always blame me. But before I never complained about it, you know, because all my mates never used to say that they're picking on me, but I used to say, "Oh no," you know, I always thought they've got a job to do and that's their job.
A lot of police arrests for soliciting took place here in Argyle Square. It was the response of the new black arrivals to being picked up by police that made it apparent just how different they were. In the past, prostitutes would accept the police's actions as an occupational hazard and plead guilty. Chantal wouldn't. She pleaded not guilty and won her case. It was one of the first such cases, and others may follow her lead.
They're saying they're not going to take it anymore, and that in future, when they're not guilty, they're going to plead not guilty. You know? This is something really I don't think the police really like. They want you to sort of take everything, you know.
It was this kind of feeling that led the prostitutes, many of them black, to occupy this church 3 weeks ago. At the time, the main aim was a protest against what they saw as police harassment. But a glance at this leaflet, produced at the time of the occupation, shows that the story had gone beyond just another set of people in conflict with the police.
It contains a list of the occupiers' demands which, if fulfilled, won't concern just these women. Those demands could have a major impact on the lives of many other young black women who've never had anything to do with prostitution. The first striking thing about the leaflet is its call for support from local councils and named political leaders. The occupiers seem to be arguing that their problems should be regarded as a legitimate political cause. They have had some support from left-wing politicians like Tony Benn and Paul Boateng, and from their local MP. Kate Allen, the chair of Camden Women's Committee, and someone that the occupiers particularly looked to for support, wholeheartedly backed them.
The women who occupied the church felt that they had come to the end of their tether, that nobody was paying any attention to their needs and their demands in terms of policing in the area and the way that they were being treated. So, as far as they were concerned, that was the last stand that they could take to actually make sure that people started to take them seriously, take their demands seriously. And in terms of that, they've certainly achieved quite an amount. So I think it's very valid.
But even more significant in the future than who backed them are the issues on which the women campaigned. First, the right to decent accommodation. Second, the sort of work that will give them economic independence from their families, from men and from the state. And thirdly, black prostitutes particularly want the black community's support to make up for rejection by their own families. It's these issues that brought them onto the game in the first place. But as Wilmette Brown points out, these aren't issues that affect just prostitutes.
The demands that young black prostitute women are making are demands that affect the future of all black women in this country, because they're demands fundamentally about the lack of options in our economic lives, in our personal lives, that affect all of us. The fact that as single mothers, we have such problems with housing and accommodation and are up against the housing authorities so often is something that's common to black women generally. The fact that Social Security is low, that job options are few, that wages are low. These are issues that are really issues that concern all black women, so that here we have young black prostitute women who in many ways are the most vulnerable of black women, the most up against the law, who are raising demands really on behalf of all black women and pointing a direction for the kind of organizing that's increasingly happening among black women to go in, the kinds of direction that the black women's movement, I think, as a whole is going to take.
For activists like Wilmette Brown, however, the biggest immediate challenge may well be the reluctance of the black community itself to accept that prostitutes' demands are legitimate, either politically or morally. What do you think the attitude of the black community will be to the fact that black prostitute women are saying that fundamentally their problems are the same as all black women's problems?
Well, the initiative that young black prostitute women have taken has already opened up a tremendous debate over the whole question of respectability in the black community, whether the immorality is the poverty that black people are forced to live in, or whether the immorality is women's immorality. Because let's face it, no matter what we do as black people, it seems we never measure up, we're never respectable enough. And I think that we've reached a turning point where the kind of support that has come for black prostitute women from women who are not prostitutes has taken the position that the immorality is not with the women, but with the poverty that black people are forced to live in. In addition to that, there's the whole question of the generations of black people, because the older generation has to make a decision to support young black people who are up against the law, where whereas the older generation may not in every instance agree with the means that the youth are using. There's no question that older black people have to stand behind and with people in that confrontation, or else the whole community doesn't survive.
The wider question posed by Wilmette Brown will probably be controversial, especially with people who don't agree with her views about respectability. We intend to devote one of our future studio debates to this subject, so if you have strong views on the issues raised in that film, or if you'd like to join us to discuss it on the programme, write to us here at London Weekend Television with your opinions. We'll be giving you our address in part 2. Now, if you're one of the thousands who's been anxiously checking to find out if the new...
Did you want to stand on it? That was it. Okay.
So now we have a panel, right? And I get to introduce this panel.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe the panel wants to assemble. Okay. First up, I want to introduce Rachel West with US Prostitute Collective, and then Jane with Global Women's Strike, and Nell with Women of Color in Global Women's Strike. Do you want to take it? No.
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to say, which I forgot to say, the English Collective of Prostitutes is our sister organization, and with Empower in Thailand, we together form the International Prostitutes Collective. And this event today is marking our 40th anniversary of the US Prostitutes Collective. We started in 1982, and we've been campaigning for the decriminalization of prostitution, for resources for women who want to get out of prostitution, and for safety and rights for sex workers. And then I have a collective statement that we've written. We're a multiracial organization, so we got input from all the different women in our organization, and this statement is by all of us. Anti-racism and anti-poverty were always central to the campaigning of us pros. Can you hear me? Okay.
Closer to the microphone, maybe.
Well,
no, the microphone is only for online.
Yeah.
The microphone does not help us, it helps the live stream. So Rachel, you have to speak
Yeah.
up.
And you may want to hold the microphone more in front of your mouth.
Yeah. Okay. Anti-racism and anti-poverty were always central to the organizing of the U.S. Prostitutes Collective. In particular, but not only, we focused on sex workers who are the most vulnerable to police harassment and violence, those who are locked out of inside jobs and forced to work on the streets. We promoted a study that said when welfare was cut, that's cash assistance to single mothers, the numbers of sex workers, the number of single mothers arrested for prostitution increased, a direct connection between poverty and sex work. In the 40 years that have gone by, we've seen change, and I wanted to talk about some of the change that we've seen and some of the crucial victories that we've won over the years, and protections that the sex worker rights movement has won. I wanted to point out this little booklet that's available at the back, and that lists and describes some of the concrete achievements that we've won over the years. And I'm just going to run through a few of them. One was as has been mentioned, the City of San Francisco's task force. The city government set up a task force, and a number of us were appointed to it, and we had the job of coming up with strategies and recommendations to the city, and it took 2 years. It was an amazing time. The city was prostitution, the issue of prostitution was spotlighted, and the whole country was watching this task force. It was the first time that sex worker groups were involved, and we came up with a really good report and recommendations to the city, some of which have been implemented. Then us pros, US Prostitutes Collective, spearheaded a fight back in 2013 when we found out that when a sex worker was brutally raped and beaten, and she came to us and told us she had tried to claim compensation from the Victim Compensation Program and was denied because they had a specific regulation that said sex workers are not eligible. We thought that was outrageous. So we started organizing to get rid of that regulation, and we found out that formerly incarcerated people, you come out of prison, you're on probation or parole, they were also excluded. So we joined together and we organized a statewide campaign. It took us a year, pressing the Victim Compensation Program. And in the end, they said, okay, we'll get rid of that regulation. So we won that. And that was an amazing victory. That was our really public fight. And it was really thrilling. We got a lot of press at that time, which was great. We also worked with other groups in the city to press the police department and the district attorney's office in San Francisco to not arrest and prosecute sex workers coming forward to report crime, violent crime against them. You'd go to the police and say, I was beaten up, and they would say, well, where were you working and what were you wearing? And they were more interested in trying to establish that you were a prostitute than the violence that happened to you. And it took us 3 years. The district attorney's office came up after about 6 months and agreed to the prioritizing safety for sex workers resolution. They actually have policy now that they can't arrest you and they can't prosecute you. It took longer to get the police department to agree to that, but they did finally agree after, I think it was 3 years. We now have a safety for sex workers policy in San Francisco that also calls, if the police have been perpetrators of violence, they can also be prosecuted. That was a hard one to get, but we did get them to finally agree to that. And then following those San Francisco policies, we organized with other organizations and got a state bill to prioritize safety for sex workers and for the police not to use condoms as evidence. They are now not allowed to use condoms as evidence, and statewide in California, they cannot arrest you if you go to report a violent crime. So those were, took years, but it's made a difference, and we're looking now to see how they're implementing it, because it's one thing to get policy, and it's another thing to make sure that the police are actually following the rules. And then this year, there was a big organizing effort to get rid of the loitering for prostitution law. Now that law is the police can use against anybody saying, oh, she's loitering because she looks like a sex worker, and it was used in a very discriminatory way against anybody they wanted to go and arrest. You were going to the store and they said you were loitering. And the fact that we got this law abolished this year in July, the governor signed the bill, it went through the legislature, which was amazing, was the strength of the sex worker movement, but it was also the black and brown movements against police abuse that were exploding at that time, and the police illegality. All of that came together, and the bill was passed and signed. So it's going to be going into force January the 1st, 2023. The police cannot arrest sex workers for loitering. And they're pissed about it. We'll say something about that. We've always called out, our organization has always called out against racist policing from our beginning days. We actually started as a group of black sex workers in New York. It was called New York Pros, and then we grew into a national group in 1982, and we started in San Francisco as Us Pros. Another change that we've seen recently, and you probably know about this, is when Chesa Boudin was DA, he stopped prosecuting crimes of poverty, which prostitution is, and he wasn't arresting sex workers. But now, I don't know how many of you have heard about the mission with the new DA. She has said she is going to prosecute, and the police, the DA, and a limited number of residents in the Mission District have got together, and they're calling for, more police harassment, a crackdown in the Mission. Yeah, you're nodding. Exactly. And we're going to say more in the action part of this, but we've produced an action alert that it describes like what's going on in the Mission, like the police coming in with big lights, shining them on women, trying to chase women out, move them out, which pushes women into more danger because women have to go into unlit areas, industrial areas that are unsafe because the police are harassing them. They're trying to run from the police. So that's only going to cause more violence. And I don't know how many of you saw the latest news today of this border patrol agent guilty of murder. He was convicted of killing 4 prostitutes. That's the most recent thing. And he thought prostitutes were trash and so dirty, is what it says in this article. And when they do these kind of crackdowns, that's the message the public's getting. Sex workers are trash, that we're going to kick them out of the neighborhood, and more violence happens.
What state was he in?
That was in San Antonio, Texas. Right. And so, we're really horrified at the kind of language the Mission police are using. For example, Tony Flores of the San Francisco Special Victims Unit, he's supposed to be concerned about victims and violence against women. He was quoted in the papers saying he's going to try and make it uncomfortable for those people to go out there. So let the games begin. They're seeing, hunting down vulnerable women as a game. That's how the police are describing it in the Mission. And so we're going to be, doing something about that, and we're going to ask you to as well. We have an action alert that we'll talk about. I'm almost done. So today we're also marking the Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. It's a day every year. It's actually on December the 17th, but we're marking it today because we couldn't do it that day. And we want to especially highlight the work of the Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Murders. We've been working with the Black Coalition in LA, and they've been organizing for decades against the murder and serial murders and disappearance of over 200 black women in LA. not many people have heard about this, but it's a horrific crime, and they've been campaigning for justice and police accountability, because the police named those murders as NHI, no human involved. That's how they call them.
Say that again, please.
NHI, no human involved. And they didn't do anything to stop the murders. And so the Black Coalition, Black community, had to get together and organize to get police accountability and for something to be done. And they are now working on a permanent memorial for the victims in LA. Nell will say more about the systemic poverty that pushes most sex workers into prostitution. And Jane's going to be talking about getting money into mothers' hands to address poverty. I mean, that's really also what we're all campaigning about. And I want to end by remembering the church occupation in San Francisco in 1917. About 200 women walked into a church in San Francisco to protest, extreme repression by the police at that time. They wanted to kick them out of the Barbary Coast, and it was led by a vicar in a local church in the Tenderloin. And the women went into the church, and they went right up to the pastor was leading it, and took over the pulpit.
Which church?
It's in the Tenderloin. It's not there anymore. But I could.
Do it again.
Is this San Francisco Rescue Mission?
No, it was in the Tenderloin, like down there where the Barbary Coast was. There was a church there. Yeah, it's not there anymore, because we actually did an action and marched to the place where the church was a few years ago. We have a book in the back that describes that whole struggle in the Barbary Coast. The women went up there was a moral crusade against them. It was really vicious. And in the end, they did move all the women out, the moral crusade by the police and the vicar. The women went up and said to the congregation there, nearly every one of these women is a mother or has someone depending on her. They are driven into the life by economic conditions. If you want to stop prostitution, stop the new girls from coming into it. You won't do any good by attacking us. Why don't you attack those conditions? I mean, that is what we're saying today. Those women were saying it back in 1917, and the conditions haven't changed that much. So, like our sisters in London, we say mothers need money, stop the criminalization of sex work, end police brutality and illegality and racism. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Jane Welford from Global Women's Strike. And at this event, we're highlighting the work of Mother. Yeah, we're highlighting.
Do you want to do it like this?
Okay.
It's the live stream mic. It's the live stream mic, so it doesn't feed into a speaker. Yeah.
At this event, we're highlighting the work of mothers, and particularly mothers who are sex workers. We've joined with U.S. Prostitutes Collective in the Bay Area and Women of Color in the Global Women's Strike to hold this event. Our struggles share the common threads of organizing against poverty, violence, and the taking of our children. Selma James launched a campaign called Wages for Housework in 1972, which now coordinates Global Women's Strike, following the founding of Women for Wages for Housework. A number of autonomous organizations within the campaign were founded, including Wages Due Lesbians, now Queer Strike, and the English Collective of Prostitutes, the sister organization of US Pros. Together we campaign for recognition, money, and other resources for those doing caring work all over the world, giving birth to the whole human race, nursing the babies, socializing the children, shopping, cooking, cleaning, caring for the elders, carrying water, growing food. This holds the whole society together. Caring work is essential for the healthy functioning of the entire society. and is valued at $1.5 trillion a year to the US economy and $3.8 trillion worldwide. I lost my first child, my only daughter, to adoption in 1968. I was 19 and had no support system. I was numb at first. I was numb at first and had suicidal ideas. I was devastated and floundering for years. 13 years later, my son was born, and that was very healing for me. I searched for years and finally found my daughter when she was 21. That was so important for both of us, and at the same time, the damage was done. I know the terrible pain of losing a child. Many sex worker mothers today are having their children taken away by child welfare because they are called unfit mothers. Homeless mothers are hiding their children in tents when social workers come around. Mothers in poverty are having their children fast-tracked into foster care and adoption because of their poverty. But mothers are fighting back in organizations like Give Us Back Our Children, which are part of our network. And as a result of the work of formerly incarcerated women and others, legislation was passed in California that says children can no longer be removed from their homes because their families are poor, that poverty is not neglect. This has established a precedent in the US. I raised my second child, my son, on my own, was able to get aid to families with dependent children, which was a direct payment to me. Because of this money, I was able to leave an abusive relationship when my son was 2. I was able to get a place of our own and raise my son in a peaceful way. AFDC was drastically changed by the Clintons in 1996, requiring a mother to leave her child for 30 hours a week in childcare and do low-paid jobs in order to get welfare. Thousands of mothers and their children were thrown into poverty, forcing so many into the underground economy. Many mothers, particularly black and other mothers of color, ended up in prison. We're working on getting the child tax credit reinstated and made permanent. The child tax credit, which stopped in December of last year, gave $300 per child per month up to the age of 6, and $250 per child up to the age of 17. This made a huge difference, lifting 50% of poor children out of poverty. This past week was a big push for the child tax credit to be reinstated. This would give mothers options. Mothers of young girls would have money to help their daughters so that their daughters wouldn't need to go out on the streets to get money for food and clothing. Even President Biden has said there should be no tax credit for corporations unless this child tax credit is reinstated. The Global Women's Strike also launched the International Care Income campaign, pushing for governments to pay caregivers, those taking care of family, those growing food and caring for the land, and to protect the natural world. There is information on the literature table over there about this campaign too. For the first time, mothers and other caregivers globally are being polled on what they want. This international survey is called What Mothers and Other Caregivers Want. You can find this flyer on the literature table over there too. It has a QR code that you can scan that takes you directly to the survey. We hope that you'll fill it out and take it to family and friends. The survey has participants in both the global north and south and is gathering information to help with the push for governments to pay for this caring work. We're glad to be part of this event today with sex workers. We know that when sex workers are not safe, no woman is safe. Power to the sisters from Thailand to Nigeria to India to Peru to Haiti. So, yes, thank you all.
Thank you so much. So, let's see if I can pull that. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. We're going to take questions and comments after I provide these remarks. And so just hold on. I'm Nell Myhand. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am with Women of Color in the Global Women's Strike. And I also organize with the Poor People's Campaign, which is an endorser of this event. So we're glad to be here. I'm glad to be here wearing both those hats. So I'm giving a statement for women of color in the Global Women's Strike, one of the organizers of the event. And we want to just start by acknowledging that the violence is disproportionate. It falls on women of color, trans women, Black women, right? And so our presence here today is complex. We're here not only to celebrate the occupation in London and the work of the Us Pros here in San Francisco, but also to remember the violence that sex workers have faced and continue to face, and the victims of that violence and the survivors of that violence. And so we just want to hold them with us in this process. So California Penal Code 653.22 used routinely to harass and exploit poor and disproportionately Black women. It's led to the criminalization of otherwise legal activities like walking or standing in public, resulting in the harassment of Black and brown LGBTQ plus communities, mostly women, for simply looking like a sex worker. Black people accounted for over 56% of loitering charges between 2017 and 2019 in Los Angeles, despite making up less than 10% of the city's population. Us Pros has highlighted figures that show Black people nationally make up 42% of all prostitution arrests, while being only 13.2% of the population. And racism, even within the sex industry, means women of color are all too often forced to work on the street under the most dangerous conditions. And for the women of color who are not sex workers, we are impacted by these laws as well. Whether it's entering hotels where we are often suspected of being sex workers, or in stores where we are racially profiled and followed. So one case that I just want to lift up here comes from my work in Richmond. And earlier this year, a person who I'm in community with in Richmond in the 23rd Street corridor, people may recognize that as it's labeled an area of prostitution and human trafficking. And so she lives there and had the I don't even know how to describe it, but a sex worker was murdered on her lawn. And the thing about it is that this woman, Sheila, 59 years old, a 59-year-old Black woman, murdered. And the police told my friend she knew better, as if it was a choice. She just felt like being out there, right? And so the work of ending violence against sex workers is really critical. It continues that we lose our sisters, and we can't continue to accept that. So working there to create a response that doesn't blame her for what she suffered and doesn't increase the risk for women on the street, which we know criminalization does, is our focus. Her life is of value. As Black women, our lives have historically been devalued from slavery to Jim Crow to today. And we are victims of racism, sexism, and economic deprivation. Similarly, Indigenous women, whom we also want to lift up today, as we also mourn the missing and murdered Indigenous women across America, the Americas. The data in violence against sex workers means not only the increased risk of violent encounters with police and clients, It also means policy violence, from taking our children not because of abuse, but because we're poor, criminalized due to lack of a care income for the work that we do, caring for our families. The work of fighting for communities and fighting for justice is also work. And that work is disproportionately on people who are people of color, black people, and people who are poor. Historically and today, as women of color, we have always created profit for those who rule over us. Yet when we demand our right to welfare and other resources, that we're being denied and victimized by being called unproductive, lazy scroungers. It's important that the sex workers' contribution, which is significant to the economy of San Francisco, be recognized. And we want our money, okay? It's like we're contributing to the economy and living in poverty. So women and children make up 73% of the poor in the US. The criminalization of poverty, including prostitution, is rooted in policy violence, like the obscene and growing wealth gap in the US. Nationally, 43% of the US is living in poverty, 140 million people. And in California, 50% of the population is in poverty, 20 million people. Most sex workers are mothers struggling to support their families. How many of the 80% of women in prison who are mothers are there because they refused poverty and sold sex to feed their children? So I have just a few facts about the California economy. 4th largest in the world, worth $3.4 trillion. And our political leaders claim that there's a $97.5 billion budget surplus, which is in grave need to be challenged. Because how can you say you have a surplus in the bank and people on the street and hungry? So we know that the money is here in California. Out of the 7 richest counties in California, out of the 10 richest counties in California, 7 are in the Bay Area. San Francisco is number 4. There's no reason anybody should be homeless or hungry. So Black Women for Wages for Housework, founded in the mid-1970s and today coordinates Women of Color and Global Women's Strike, wrote a document a few decades ago called Money for Prostitutes is Money for Black Women. And it spelled out the interrelationship between racism, poverty, and criminalization of sex workers. Today we're working with Us Pros as part of a movement for a care income for those who care for people and the natural world. We're bringing back the extended child tax credit, and we're working against poverty of any of us wherever we are. It's past time to end poverty in California and everywhere else, so we're gonna, fight to close the wealth gap starting here. Thank you so much. Thank you for your attention and your presence here. And, thank you. And I'd be interested to hear if you have comments. You're welcome to ask questions of the panel, and Pastor B, I'm gonna include you in that. So for folks who came in late, we are live streaming, and so the camera is near that pole, so you're not in the camera view, and if you don't want to be, just know that the camera view is here. Okay, thank you.
More of a comment.
Mm-hmm.
I heard about this 2 or 3 days ago, and I was riveted to this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I tried to talk myself out of it because I couldn't get a ride. It was raining. And then a friend of mine, 82-year-old Air Force vet, said, I'm interested too, so he drove me here today.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm a poet, I know it, and I flow it, and I'm a troublemaker, and an instigator, and a gardener. And I wrote a action plan of consideration because the domination of the feminine has been going on around the world forever. And right now you see what's going on in Iran. Mexico is extremely dangerous for women. All these things are going on. So I wrote down 6 events that are within the next 4 days that could tie women together with the strike, because the only thing the system cannot handle, and the system is thoroughly corrupted, is the strike. By way of introduction, I am Peter. From the age of 3, I was sexually abused. I was sold into male pornography and other pornography all through my youth. There was a guy named Jerry Sandusky. I saw a thing on Abu Jamal over there. Jerry Sandusky took me as a white male prostitute at the age of, I don't know, 17 or whatever, to witness the murder of an officer that was blamed on Abu Jamal, who was Wesley Cook at the time. My affidavit got him off death row, but the lawyer said otherwise. Some people say I'm a 5150, but my poetry, I tell you, is really more than just nifty. But I'm also very hardcore about what I'm hearing and what I wish to see, because half measures will not save the day. But a strike, the only thing the system cannot handle is for us to light the general strike candle. And right now, there's 5 or 6 things going on.
Okay, so
in the Bay Area
Peter,
that'll turn this all together.
I appreciate you being here, and now that we know that you have something you want to offer, I'm going to ask you to, anybody who's interested to talk with you about that, to contact you and allow time for other people here to comment and raise questions.
As you wish.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Better or worse, I'm also Peter and I'm his driver.
Mm-hmm.
So either congratulate me or accept my apologies. He's an interesting guy and he has some good opinions and some thoughtfulness. I served 2 Indian tribes in Arizona when I ran a phone company. The biggest enemy they had was our government, which kept them dependent on the government because it was a positive way for the government to stand off. And I think that's applied very much beyond just indigenous people to people of color. I didn't hear you mention I'm not sure the word, the social aspect, that there are so many single, particularly women of color, pregnant. No, where's the mail?
So Peter, thank you so much. We're not going to blame the people who are being victimized here, because it's not up to anybody to say who gets pregnant, when, by how, who they form relationship with. Each one of us is entitled to have what we need, period, without regard to moralistic judgments being made about the choices that we make. We work for the money, it's ours, we should have it. So thank you so much for your comment.
I agree.
Thank you. Mary.
In one of the last Mother Joneses, there's a big spread about the foster care system and how kids are taken away not about abuse, but by poverty.
Yes.
And
Yes.
somebody else's moral standard.
Right.
And especially now, there's more and more people homeless. The other day, recently on Democracy Now! Radio, there was, somebody quoted 100,000 homeless children in New York in 2021.
Right. Right. Thank you so much. We know that when the welfare reform bill happened, that they moved money from welfare to child protective services. And they hired social workers to go get the kids who were now being neglected because they had a work requirement. So we know that it's systematic, it's institutional, and it's pretty routine. They've, that film that we watched could have been made yesterday, right here. So the issues are pervasive and, really like challenging, but we're still here fighting back. We're still here. So there was this comment, and then this comment, and then Rachel has a call to action for us.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for having this event and for and so much respect for our elders for starting these organizations and doing the hard work that younger generations have to keep to carry on the work for. And so I'm with St. James's Berkeley, and we've been working a long time for all of the intersections that include sex workers. My mom had to stay in the closet as being gay and as being a sex worker for fear of losing me in the 70s and for threats of me being taken away from her. And I'm proud long-time sex worker in many aspects of sex work, and proud mother working my ass off to make ends meet and keep my kid. And it's always that pervasive fear. Yeah, I just really appreciate you all highlighting the things that you are, and that all of that care work that we do that's unpaid, it's wrong, and it's all of our responsibility to make sure that we're doing the best we can to take care of each other. So I really, really appreciate you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Last comment.
What's the name of the organization of attorneys that represents women? Do you know of any that represents women in particular?
I do not.
Yeah, attorneys that represents women in anything?
I know that there are some attorneys who do work for free. We have worked with attorneys who have provided legal consult and up to and including some representation. But I don't know of a firm that specializes in providing women, who are under attack, legal support.
Legal counseling and things like that.
Yeah. We know of some individual attorneys, but not anybody whose focus that is.
Just Bay Area Legal Aid or something?
They do lots of different things, but I don't know that they do any work with sex workers.
Women striking together is way more powerful than any lawyer firm.
Okay, thanks so much.
I mean, that was a women's strike. When women went into the church, they were on strike. That was the occupations were
I'm gonna just pass
women
it.
striking. Yeah. Oh, it is. Okay. So we have a couple of calls for action, and we've mentioned them. And Celestina, I think you would be interested in this because I know you work in the mission. We have an action alert about what's going on in the mission right now with the police harassment, shining lights on women, harassing women. Oops. Can you just move your foot? You each getting one.
Please, don't interrupt the program. Please.
Can you do that afterwards?
So you walking around, can I not walk around hand things out or not?
This is part of the program.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But this is not part of the program. Sorry. You
Okay.
can do that afterwards.
As you wish.
Okay, it's an action alert, and it's asking people to call and email District Attorney Brooke Jenkins, who has said she's going to change the policy of Chesabuden, who was not prosecuting sex workers, and she's going to start to, she's encouraging the police to bring her charges of sex work-related offenses so that she can prosecute. So she's taking a different stand and going for criminalization. And she needs to hear from people in San Francisco, people anywhere, that we don't agree with that. We don't agree with criminalizing women. And there's a lot of information about this in this action alert. So we hope you'll call and put pressure on District Attorney Brooke Jenkins to ask her to publicly withdraw her support for this police crackdown and abandoning prosecuting sex work-related offenses. Yep, Celestina?
It says two-foot letter below. Is that a different page?
district, what?
I think that would be really helpful. The template letter.
Oh, yeah.
Can they
We
find
actually,
that video?
we have one. It's not quite finished, but we can send it to you when it's done.
Or maybe if it's on the website, maybe
Yeah.
you can just like copy and paste.
Sure. Yeah. No, that would be helpful, yeah.
Oh, USPros.net.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do that.
Yeah, on the, oh yeah, go ahead.
You know how the supervisors feel about Brooke Jenkins' crackdown on mission?
No, that's part of our work. We're just getting going on it, you know, and yeah, we'll be definitely talking to the supervisors and finding out.
Hillary Ronan is who.
Yeah, Hillary Ronan. She's sympathetic.
Hillary Ronan, I actually just had a meeting with Hillary Ronan about it specifically.
I can't hear you.
I just had a meeting with Hillary Ronan and her aides about specifically this that we're talking about. So if she hears more voices about it, you know, I mean, she's a politician, so you know, the more support she hears behind it, the more she can feel like it's something she can get behind.
Yeah, and she's getting pressured by
Because
those
The,
residents.
the Central Mission Neighbors group is they're mobilizing the cops and putting pressure on the politicians. So.
Right.
And also over on the table, we have the new international survey, What Mothers and Caregivers Want. And it has a QR code that you can just scan with your phone, and it takes you right to the survey. So you could take one of those to give to family and friends, people who are caring for elders or family members. Or yes, over on the table there, and in Spanish and English.
What's the title, please?
It's called Take the New International Survey, What Mothers and Caregivers Want.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. I just had a meeting this morning with Supervisor Mandelman, and he said to say hello to you, Mr. Dean. Because he has done some things with his congregation. My name is Pam. I'm from St. Paul's Lutheran on the Polk Street. But I wanted to just share that, similar to what you were saying, what do the supervisors think? Organizing some meetings with supervisors, no matter where they are in the city. This is a problem with the city. The city is becoming so economically diverse. Many people are pushed into things that they don't want to do, but they have to survive. And so that's all I would encourage people to contact your own supervisor, ask them, you know, if you could help set up a meeting, and then you know, I don't know what plan you have, but if you had a plan or someone you could contact, because these supervisors are interested in hearing about all the issues of the city, and this is a deep, deep issue. Thank you for having this. Thank you, Mr. B. too.
I mean, if anybody's interested in helping us organize too, please come up and talk with us, because you know, we'd like to collect names of people, so maybe we could have a meeting. That would be good. The other thing I meant to say is you reminded me that it's not just the mission. This is a citywide crackdown with the, you know, the police feel empowered because of the new DA, and they're actually starting to implement and enforce the sit and lie law. We all know we all fought back in the day again. Well, Harvey Milk protested that law back in the day, the sit and lie, that makes it illegal, to, you know, for somebody to sit or lie on the sidewalk between, 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. at night. Anyway, I forget. But it makes it illegal all day for you to sit or lie on the sidewalk. And they're starting to enforce that anywhere in the city. So it's not just the mission. And they're also starting to enforce traffic stops. And, you know, evidence has showed that black people are 11 times more likely to be stopped, you know, on those traffic stops. And the mission, too, they're doing traffic stops. So it's more, you know, it's a citywide crackdown that's happening, focusing also on the mission. So,
Are you aware of the human compromise factor?
Anyway, I think we're ending now.
Are you
Yep.
familiar with
Are
the
we
human
done?
compromise factor?
What's that?
That's the blackmail factor that contains and controls all the courts and all the law enforcement. So even people that might want to help you can't. And that's why I'm humbly trying to let you understand the power that you have.
So we
is
know
power-
that.
is
Yeah,
power-
we already
know that.
is the
Peter,
power
actually,
of strike.
thank you so, our name is Strike, okay?
That's
So thank you,
wonderful.
thank you so much. And if you have signed in
and would like to support our work will reach out to you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I just have one other activism question or statement to make. If folks aren't following the Earn It bill, there's national legislation happening right now called the Earn It bill that's really problematic for sex workers. So you can sign some petitions online. It's a Lindsey Graham bill that was put forth that will basically give a backdoor to every page on the internet to block sex content, which will impact every sex worker that's working digitally. So it's another area of activism if you're doing.
What's this called?
The Earn It bill.
Earn It?
Yep, it's being kind of backdoored into another bill, but it's
E-A-R-N.
Yep, Earn It. It's the follow-up to FESTA's also.
That's sneaky because it totally sounds like the Earn It Keep It, like tax relief for
The Earn It bill.
Earn It bill, yeah. So it's currently in committee, but it's it basically gives this backdoor to the internet to shut down any website that has anything that would remotely be considered exploitation of sex, which is all sex work content. So it'll have a big impact. It'll have a big impact. Yeah. So this is the follow-up to the first bill.
Also, hopefully, do look on the literature table for the information about the child tax credit, because we're really pushing hard to try and get that reinstated and made permanent, because it did lift 50% of poor children out of poverty.
Yes, it did.
So,
and then they dumped them back in.
yeah, they dumped them back in. So there's a literature there, and about give us back our children too.
I forgot to mention, this was published in the UK for the 40th anniversary of their occupation. So it's a new book, and it's available at the front and costs $3.
Perfect. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Keep coming back.
Yes.
Did everybody sign the mailing list at the front?
Thank you so much.
Well, we made it through. Yeah. No, we're all